I call the member for Sandringham.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. Well, I rise today on behalf of the 6.8 million Victorians who are going to be paying more and getting less because of the budget handed down last Tuesday. Victorians should have a government that works for them, that makes their lives easier and that looks to create a better future for our children. Just last week, I visited Highett Charcoal Chicken in my electorate, a fantastic local business, Speaker, employing locals and feeding our community. Good story. In the last 12 months, their costs have significantly increased. From spuds, chooks and the cost of cooking oil, their margins are getting tighter and tighter at the same time as their costs and government taxes are increasing. And like this local business, Victorians should hold hope for the future and have aspiration that their government will reduce their costs, not increase them. But instead, we have a government that is trapping Victorians with the price of debt-fuelled spending and tens of billions in waste and government cost blowouts. Rather than reflect the best of the Victorian people, this budget reflects the financial mismanagement and lack of credibility and integrity of the Andrews Labor government. This is not a budget that makes lives better, but one that burdens Victorians with more debt, more taxes and cuts to promised infrastructure projects. And it is a budget that divides Victorians instead of uniting them. And I say this at the outset, Speaker. We on this side of the House, we believe in Victorians. We believe in everyone in this state, and we fundamentally believe in everyone having a genuine chance to get ahead. The government's budget divides. It is a budget premised on division and class warfare. It taxes aspiration. It taxes a fair go. It is a budget that punishes 6.8 million Victorians for trying to get ahead. If you're a family hoping to send your children to an independent school to give them the very best start in life, it will cost you an extra $1,000 per child every single year for the next decade. If you're hoping to invest in the property market, you'll pay an extra $1,000 a year for the privilege, and you'll go on paying an extra $1,000 every year for the next 10 years. If you're a business wanting to grow and employ more people, you'll be slogged with higher payroll tax. If you're looking to buy a new home and land package, you'll be paying more because developers will be paying more in land tax. And if you're hoping for a pay increase, whether you're a nurse or a road worker or someone who works in an office, this budget increases payroll tax when the government's own Department of Treasury and Finance have demonstrated that lower payroll taxes result in higher wages. For tens of thousands of families across this state, the budget will cost them $30,000 over the next decade at a time when they can least afford it. Now, Speaker, just 18 months ago, the Treasurer said in this House that, quote, "We have done a lot for Victorians by taking the weight off them in terms of the tax burden." But far from taking the weight off Victorians, the government's budget will increase costs for Victorians. Victorians are already paying the highest taxes in Australia, $5,638 per person, more than any other state in the nation. And since Labor was elected 9 years ago, Victoria's tax take is set to double, and they've introduced nearly 50 new taxes. Now, this side of the House backs the dreams, we back the ambitions, and we back the aspirations of 6.8 million Victorians, and we want them to get ahead. Let me be absolutely clear about this. We oppose the tax hikes in this budget. We oppose Labor's schools tax. We oppose Labor's rent tax. We oppose Labor's jobs tax. And we oppose Labor's debt tax. All taxes on aspiration, all taxes on a fair go, because we are for Victorians. We not only oppose Labor's school tax, but we will repeal it in government. And we will legislate a state debt cap. We oppose these taxes every day that we are in opposition. We oppose them because they are unjust. We oppose them because they divide rather than unite Victorians. We oppose them because they are counter to productivity, counter to growth, counter to job growth and counter to a fair go. We say to millions of Victorian families under the Liberal Nationals, you will be literally thousands of dollars better off every single year. Now, Victorians are paying more and more in taxes for one and only one reason: this government's approach to financial management. We on this side of the House understand a fundamental truth. Government does not spend its own money. In fact, it spends the money of 6.8 million Victorians. And every dollar spent by the government comes from taxpayers. It's money from everyday Victorians. And when governments borrow money, it means 6.8 million Victorians are left to pay the bill. Now, last Tuesday's budget means Victorians will owe $171 billion within the next 3 years. That's $25,000 for every Victorian man, woman and child. That's $22 million a day, each and every day, just to pay the Andrews government's interest bill. Under this budget, Victorians will pay this year alone $4 billion in interest payments on the government's debt. And this will increase to $8 billion within 3 years, a doubling of interest payments in just 3 years. And that $8 billion, Speaker, could be used to employ 20,000 teachers, 17,000 maternity unit nurses or 22,000 police recruits for 4 years. Wow. And of course, interest payments must be paid somehow. And as the budget demonstrates, it's through higher and more taxes and broken promises. The government will say debt-fueled spending is an investment in the future. But let's take a look at what Victorians have gotten out of the government's debt-fueled spending. They've gotten close to 50 new taxes, with more than half of these taxes directly affecting the property industry and making it more difficult for Victorians to own their own home. They've gotten $30 billion in wasted spending due to infrastructure cost blowouts. They've gotten a health system where more than 79,000 Victorians are waiting for elective surgery, with some waiting more than 280 days for surgery. And it's a health system that spends less per person on public hospitals than any other state or territory in the nation except for South Australia. They've got an ambulance system that continues to call code orange orders because it cannot cope with demand levels. They've got a public housing system where a record high 70,000 Victorians are awaiting a roof over their head and the security and the stability that provides. They've got a justice system that has the highest pending caseload of any state or territory magistrates court, with more than 83,000 cases currently outstanding. They've got a public education system that makes Melbourne the most expensive city in the country to educate a child in the government system, costing an average $102,877 per child from foundation to year 12. They've got an estate that is trailing behind Tasmania, South Australia, New South Wales and Queensland on economic performance. They've got an estate that's had its credit rating downgraded by international credit agencies not once but twice. They've gotten the world's longest lockdown. They've gotten a Department of Families, Fairness and Housing that has child protection data which does not comply with the government data quality standards. They've got an infrastructure projects that the Auditor-General found to be based on business cases that do not fully support informed investment decisions. They've gotten a former IBAC Commissioner, critical of the government, an Ombudsman, critical of the government, a Parliamentary Budget Office, critical of the government, and Supreme Court judges and former members of the Court of Appeal, all critical of the government. And now, Speaker, they're getting a budget that will see them pay more while getting less. This budget not only costs Victorians more, it demonstrates the failings of the government's own fiscal strategy. It cuts jobs rather than creates jobs. It fails to bring down debt levels. It fails to rein in public sector project cost blowouts. And it not only raises taxes, but it introduces new ones. If the government's fiscal strategy were a business, it would be subject to deceptive and misleading conduct investigations by the ACCC. And that is perhaps an apt point because this budget also speaks to the integrity of the Andrews Labor government. The government promised to build the Geelong Fast Rail, and this budget breaks that promise. The government promised to build the Melbourne Airport Rail Link, and this budget breaks that promise. And to think, just a few years ago, the Premier stated in this House, not once, but twice, we keep our promises. The ACCC, Speaker, would have ample fodder. They would have an absolute field day. In his budget speech on Tuesday, the Treasurer said this was a budget about economic growth and jobs. But none of this is true. The budget itself forecasts unemployment to rise. It forecasts slow economic growth. It forecasts an increase in taxes and an increase in debt. And international credit agencies have already said the budget will maintain negative pressure on the state's ratings. I do agree with the Premier on one thing. He stated in this House that AAA credit ratings were, quote, are not handed out to states gripped by economic mismanagement. Economic mismanagement indeed, and I could not agree more with the Premier. Victorians deserve better. Yeah. Now, this side of the House understands that 6.8 million Victorians have less of a chance of getting ahead when they are faced with higher taxes due entirely to this government's debt-fueled spending. No government in history has ever taxed their way back to prosperity, yet this government is increasing its take from Victorians' pockets and introducing new taxes. And I say to the 6.8 million Victorians, there is a better way. The Liberal Nationals parties know, in the heart of our DNA, that higher taxes and debt-fueled spending are not sustainable. We know that government does not provide a sustainable basis for jobs growth and investment. It's the 1,200 large businesses across our state. It's the 570,000 small businesses in Melbourne and the 150,000 small businesses in regional Victoria that generate jobs, that generate investment in the productivity capacity of the state and provide Victorians with the opportunity they need to get ahead. It's small businesses like Limoncello in the Sandringham electorate, a cafe in my area, who have been serving coffee and community for the last 22 years, that give local young people the opportunity to understand what the dignity of work actually is by employing them. And it's small businesses like Wine by Sam in Seymour that pivoted during COVID and increased their partnerships and online sales capability whilst continuing to produce award-winning wines enjoyed by many. These are the engines of Victoria's economy, and they are being burdened by the taxes of this government. Taxes caused entirely by this government's debt-fuelled spending. And the Liberal National parties also know that the aspiration of 6.8 million Victorians, the aspiration of 2 million families in this state, cannot be as easily achieved when they are facing rising cost of living pressures, higher car rego costs, higher insurance premiums, higher costs for property investment, higher taxes caused by this government. Victorian families and businesses will only be able to get ahead when the state government gets its hands out of their wallets. They will only be able to get ahead when they have a government that understands where public money comes from, the public. And they will only be able to get ahead when we have a government of integrity and a government of accountability. Now, the Liberal National parties will restore integrity and competence to our state and to the budget. Instead of more waste, higher debt and new taxes, we need a real plan to ease cost of living pressures for Victorians. And that starts with responsible economic management from the state government. Instead of introducing more increased taxes, we will focus on increasing productivity so that every Victorian gets bang for their taxpayer buck, reducing waste and cost blowouts on major projects, bringing debt under control, and supporting the private sector to invest back in our state and generate the jobs growth that we need right now. Instead of making life harder for Victorians, we will ease the pressure caused by this government's financial mismanagement and give Victorians the greater aspiration they deserve to get ahead. We will do more to encourage private enterprise and the jobs that they create for Victorians. This starts, Speaker, by cutting red tape on small businesses, curtailing the unsustainable growth on the public sector, and creating incentives for more private sector investment. We will do more for frontline services by backing in and hiring frontline doctors, nurses, teachers and social service workers that our community needs. We will do more to make our schools better by better supporting teachers, increasing academic standards and by cutting bureaucratic red tape so teachers can actually focus on teaching. We will implement an immediate and comprehensive review into the state's taxation system. We will identify opportunities to prevent young people entering the rotating door of jail and work to determine how we can best deliver early intervention to prevent crimes from occurring. We will improve transparency in the health system by promptly releasing quarterly health service performance data to the public. We will repeal Labor's unjust schools tax and immediately legislate a state debt cap. We will live within our means. And fundamentally, we will be a government that serves the people honestly and with integrity. Now, Speaker, ultimately, the budget is not about those of us in this place, but about the 6.8 million Victorians, the 2.5 million households, the 2 million families, the 128,000 teachers, the 125,000 nurses and the 1 million school kids who will inherit the decisions that we make today. And for all these people, the budget will make them worse off. Worse off because of higher unemployment, higher taxes, higher cost of living pressures and slowing economic growth. The unfortunate reality is that for as long as this government is in power, every Victorian will continue to pay more and get less because this government simply cannot manage money. And I say to every Victorian, you deserve better. You deserve a government that backs you in and delivers value for money with your hard-earned taxpayer dollars. We on this side of the House, Speaker, will continue to do everything we can to hold the Andrews Labor government to account, whilst offering the optimistic and propositional vision for Victoria that they deserve. One that's measured, one that's inclusive, one that's considered. And we seek not to divide, but to govern for every Victorian. Thank you.